Hello, and welcome to Your Health Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Hogenkamp, and today on the program, we're going to be discussing something that's near and dear to my heart as a lifelong reader, and that is the 12 health benefits of reading books. I've been thinking about doing this program for a long time. Reading has always been a big part of my life. I remember very clearly when I was 10, my parents wanted to go to the Cape to visit some friends of theirs. And all my older brothers and sisters got to stay home, but because I was only 10, I had to go with them. And I knew it was going to be a weekend of just sitting around, listening to my parents talk to their friends. And, you know, as a 10-year-old, I obviously wasn't very excited about that. Well, we get there, and Mrs. Gralton, the woman my parents were visiting, sees me, and she's like, well, here, you're bored, read a book. And I had always kind of, read a little bit kind of thing, but it hadn't been a huge part of my life. Anyway, she handed me this book, Alistair MacLean's Fear is the Key. And I've talked about this on several other venues before because I sat down and I got absorbed in that book. And over the course of the weekend, I'm not really sure what my parents and the Graltons did because I was absorbed in this book. I loved it so. When I got home from that weekend, my mom took me down to the library, and I got out as many Alistair MacLean books as I could, and I started a lifelong passion for reading that weekend. I really feel like reading has helped me in all aspects of my life, and I wanted to do this show today because I really believe in the power of reading books and that it can help improve, all of our lives. So I've been thinking about this for a while, and what gave me an urgency, there was an immediacy to me doing this show, because I happened to read a recent report from the National Endowment of the Arts on the state of reading in this country, and it was dismaying to me, and I'm going to show you why. The report said that over the last 20 years, we've had a dramatic decrease in the reading of literature, which is books, short stories, drama, plays. It's dropped 10% in the last 20 years, which means there are 20 million fewer readers of books in this country than there was 20 years ago. Even worse than that, in the past, and think about that last 20 years, that's basically been the digital age, when people have become so involved with screens and cell phones and things like that. So as screen time has gone up, book time has gone down, and you can really see where these two things would be, opposed to each other. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, this decrease in reading literature has actually accelerated quite a bit. So the National Endowments of the Arts obviously very concerned about what's going to happen over the next 5 years. So I thought to myself, what can I do about this? And I said, well, let's do a show on Your Health Matters about the importance of reading. And so as I did research about reading, all these things that I've kind of thought about reading, the power of reading, really kind of took shape for me. And I was very excited to come do today's show because there's so much information and there's so much data behind the positive effect that reading can have in your life. I mentioned earlier that we're talking about the 12 effects of reading books on your physical and mental health. I think we can all kind of understand intuitively that reading is going to be good for your mental health, but good for your physical health as well, and that's certainly very true. To start off, I wanted to talk about communication, because reading improves your ability to communicate. There is probably no more important skill in your life than your ability to communicate. You can be the smartest person in the world with the best ideas in the world. If you can't communicate them to other people, your ideas are wasted. We all kind of understand how important communication is. And I'm here to say that, unfortunately, communication skills in America are heavily on the decrease. And that's probably due to, number one, is a decrease in face-to-face interaction. It also has some, because of the pandemic, decreases face-to-face face-to-face interaction and the isolation from the pandemic. But also because of digital distractions in this social media age. Remote work, for instance. So many young people now are working remotely, and they love that because of the increased flexibility it adds to their life. But it's decreasing face-to-face interactions, which is then leading to a decrease in communication skills, which are so important. So how is it that reading improves your ability to communicate? Well, number one, it increases your vocabulary, but it increases your vocabulary particularly in an idiomatic way. So idioms, phrases, figures of speech, that kind of thing, which you see a lot in reading, they're able to communicate difficult ideas quite easily. And I wanted to give you an example of that. I remember reading a book one time, and that one of the characters said, if you want to get the mud out of the spring, you got to get the hog out of the water. And when I read that, I kind of loved the colloquialism of it. But I immediately understood what they were talking about, that you have to get to the root of the problem. But this idiomatic way of understanding it was very clear to me. And that's one of the ways that reading helps. Reading is, especially books, novels especially, full of idioms and phrases that really help you understand and communicate ideas. Reading helps you understand other people. When you communicate, to do it effectively, you have to understand the person you're talking to, whether it be your partner or somebody at work or somebody that you met on a bus. It helps to understand who they are and what their life perspective is. And there's no better way to understand that than by reading books where you're sitting down, you're getting involved in someone else's life, someone different than you, understanding their perspective, understanding their history. It's extremely important to be able to do that. The third way that reading helps you communicate is it truly improves your strategic thinking. In other words, it helps you to make a point. How many times have you been involved in a conversation with your wife or somebody at work or whoever, and that person says, so what's your point? And one of two things is happening in this conversation. Number one is, it's possible that your discussion partner understands your point, but they're just not willing to accept it or don't want to hear it at that period of time. And this goes back to what I was saying before about understanding, people. If you read more, you'll understand, characters more, and you may understand that this person does understand your point. They just don't want to hear it at that period of time, which is a helpful piece of information as you discuss something. Or it's also possible that you're just not making a good point. And that's what reading can do for you. The more you read, the better you argue. The more you read, the better you argue a point. So that's very, very important kind of thing. So again, reading, very, very helpful to improve your communication skills. Here's one for you. Reading improves your creativity. I guess I've always realized this kind of on an intuitive basis, because whatever I've been stuck in my life, maybe either with writer's block when I go to write, or when I'm trying to solve a problem I'm having difficulty with, my solution is always to read. And it can be anything. If I'm trying to fix a dishwasher, reading a book on how to fix a dishwasher might be helpful. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be just reading any book, particularly a novel. And by reading the book, ideas start popping into your head, because what's happening as you read is you're connecting different parts of your brain. And as those different parts of your brain connect, ideas start popping into your head. You start to be able to solve problems better. I would argue that there is no more important thing in the entire world than creativity. It's one of the things I worry about as we've gotten into this the age of AI. I truly don't believe that computers are capable of intelligent creativity. What they do is they can regurgitate all the things that we've done, and they can assimilate them in different forms, but they truly don't create things. It takes the human mind to create things. And one of the ways that you improve your creative power is by reading books. Now I want to get to some of the physical aspects of reading, because I think these are important, especially in this day and age of decreasing physical health. I say that all the time to people, and I just want to make the point that as of a couple of years ago, life expectancy in the United States started going down. Life expectancy in the United States started going down. So whereas we had always enjoyed every year an increasing life expectancy, that is no longer true. Now every year that goes by, our life expectancy goes down by a fraction of a year. So we're on the decline. And why is that? Well, it has mostly to do with the obesity epidemic and the diabetic epidemic and the cardiovascular health epidemic, which are all related, by the way. So how is it that reading can address this? Well, it turns out that reading lowers your blood pressure. They've done multiple studies checking people's blood pressure as they read, and there's a significant reduction in your blood pressure when you read a book. Your heart rate goes down. So when your heart rate goes down and your blood pressure goes down, those two things, which are two risk factors for poor cardiovascular outcomes, you're improving your cardiovascular health by reducing your pulse and blood pressure. So reading is good for your physical health. And to this point, reading actually leads to longevity. It's very interesting. People who read books on a regular basis have a 20% decrease in their mortality. People who read books versus people who don't read books have an expected 2-year increase in their life expectancy. I mean, to me, these are very dramatic, but I do want to point out something, and that is that these studies are kind of susceptible to bias. And what I mean by that is people who are healthier people have a tendency to be more likely to read to begin with. So there's a bit of a self-selection bias here. But that doesn't mean that if you are a person who doesn't read, who decides then to become a reader, that you're not going to enjoy that increase in mortality. So here you are listening to this program, and you think to yourself, you know, I would love to live. I'd love to have a 20% decrease in my mortality. So one of the ways you can do it is by going down to the library, go to the local bookshop, pick up your Kindle. I'm a big believer in digital books. Pick up your Kindle and start reading books, particularly fiction, particularly novels, particularly literary fiction. These are all proven to lower your mortality, increase your life expectancy. Okay. As a physician, one of the things I deal with on a day-to-day basis, especially in my practice, which is on the older side, I find that patients are very fearful of cognitive decline, i.e. dementia. Nobody wants to get Alzheimer's disease, and I think all of us know someone who's suffering from Alzheimer's disease or some type of cognitive decline, and it's difficult. We realize that, and people see a loved one suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and they feel for that person. They also don't want to get that themselves, and I've had people tell me, geez, give me cancer, give me a heart attack, don't give me that. And so it's one thing to not want something, and it's another thing to do something about not getting that thing. So how do you prevent cognitive decline? I've talked about this before in other programs, but it bears repeating for sure. The way you don't do that is to go to the pharmacy and buy some type of mineral you saw on TV or some type of nutraceutical or some type of vitamin. And I mean this, I'm going to repeat it twice. There is no evidence that any nutraceutical, vitamin, or mineral can prevent cognitive decline. And I say this to people all the time because they ask me about various products that they see, and I tell them this, there is no evidence that any nutraceutical vitamin or mineral can prevent cognitive decline. Hey, Doc, how can that be? I saw it on TV. They said it did. And you have to go back to the 1994 law passed by Congress about nutraceutical use. And what this law, a very, very long law, said in brief is that a manufacturer does not have to show any efficacy or even safety when they are selling their product. So they can advertise the product. They don't have to have proven any safety or any efficacy of that medication. To me, it's mind-boggling. It was done in 1994 at a period of time where the economy was struggling and they were trying to boost the economy, and it worked like a charm in that regard. As I mentioned before in this program, the nutraceutical industry is a multiple billion-dollar industry, and every year it grows. Every year it grows by 30%, which I did that on a previous program. It still amazes me. People are spending lots of cash on vitamins, minerals, all kinds of nutraceuticals, batwing root, milk thistle, all kinds of stuff, none of it with any efficacy. So if you do want to do something that has been proven effective at reducing cognitive decline, you know what you can do? Yeah, you guessed it. You can read books, particularly fiction. Reading books has been proven to prevent cognitive decline, lower your risk of cognitive decline. Think about it this way. If you want to get big biceps, you're going to sit around and doing arm curls. And you can see on the television screen that I have not been doing that because I do not have big biceps. But think of the brain like a muscle. If you want to have your brain get bigger, more powerful, it obviously doesn't get any bigger because it's sitting inside a confined skeletal box, but it can get bigger in the terms of it boosting its efficiency, boosting its magnitude. You increase your brain power by reading. And so, how do you exercise your brain? Well, one of the great ways of exercising your brain is by reading. Think of it this way. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to adapt and to evolve and to take in and incorporate new information. And when you're young, neuroplasticity is extremely high. This is one of the reasons that people will tell you that it's much easier to learn your language, learn a new language when you're young. You see kids grow up in bilingual families and they switch back and forth between Spanish and English or whatever languages you have very easily because you're very neuroplastic when you're young. That's a good thing. As you get older, your neuroplasticity decreases. One way to keep your neuroplasticity high is by reading books. And so, again, if you're one of these people, like all of us, who says, oh, I just don't want to get dementia, rather than just kind of, kibitz about it and go buy some medicine at the pharmacy that you don't need, read books. I'm getting now to my favorite one, and that is reading's ability to make you a more empathetic person. I think empathy is a lost skill. I don't know if that's the right word, talent. Empathy is something that makes the world a better place for sure. And unfortunately, empathy is on the decrease. Various studies have shown that empathy, particularly the ability for you to be of empathetic concern, is on the decrease. Narcissism, which is basically the opposite of empathy, is on the increase. I think it's the digital age. I think it's the social media age where everyone is everything revolves around you as an individual. The loss of people worried about the common good. People aren't so concerned about the society anymore. The common good has gone to the wayside, unfortunately. So we've seen this loss of empathy, and I'd like to bring it back. I think we need to bring empathy back. Empathy is one of the beautiful parts of us as a species. We are empathetic to each other. And that really kind of sets us apart as a species. So, how does reading improve your empathy? Well, it's very simple. You're reading a book, and again, here's another category where fiction, and especially literary fiction, improve your ability to be empathetic. You're reading about a character, you're delving into that character's life, and so now you're kind of privy to this character's emotions, their experiences, their thoughts, and it brings you outside of yourself. And that is so important. My father used to say all the time, he goes, Peter, don't judge a man until you walk a mile in his moccasins. And this goes back again to the way that reading can improve your idiomatic intelligence. Don't judge a man until you walk a mile in his moccasins. In other words, who knows what's going on in that person's life? And empathy is the ability for you to consider what's going on in someone else's life and try to figure it out. Unfortunately, as we've become in this narcissistic age that we're living in, people aren't even attempting to do that anymore. Reading books, especially literary fiction, improve your empathy. And I think that's very, very important, especially in this day and age. So, let's talk about some of the obvious ones that I skipped over. Reading decreases your anxiety and decreases your stress. As an example of this, I want to cite a personal example from last week where I had a tough day at work. I got home, I had dinner, my wife and I were sitting around after dinner, and I just happened to see this book. There's books lying all over my house. Well, they're organized to some extent. I don't want you to think they're strewn everywhere. But if it were up to me, they'd be strewn everywhere. But anyway, I picked up a book in this chair I was sitting on next to the fire. And it was a book I'd started a long time ago. And I'd put down, that happens to me a lot because I'm generally reading like 10 books at a time. But anyway, I picked up this book and I got so involved in this book. And a half an hour later, I was completely at peace, calm. All the stress and anxiety from that day at work were gone. And that's, the ability of a book to absorb you into the narrative. So important, so important. Depression. Reading is a great way to battle depression. Number one is, if you're reading a book, you're getting kind of out of your own head. That's one way. But another way, it helps you, it increases your empathy, which is a great way to battle depression. I think also when you're empathetic, you're seeing that, other people are having the same struggles that I'm having, and that helps you feel better about your own self. One last point I wanted to make about the many ways that reading can help you. Is talking about how reading can boost your brain power. So, there was a great study done. I was very much enjoyed reading this study, and it was done by a bunch of neuroscientists who were using brain imaging, PET scanning, to look at your brain while you read. And what they were able to find is that when you read, you're actually using different various parts of your brain and you're connecting them. And this is especially true when you're reading fiction and, again, literary fiction. And I've been being a big proponent today of literary fiction. Although, as I mentioned earlier, to start off with, that the reading literary fiction has gone down 10% in the last 20 years. It's gone down, and five of that 10% is in the last 5 years. And here, these novels are out there. There's so many great novels out there that we have this ability to read and improve our lives, and we're not taking advantage of that. And again, why should we take advantage of that? Well, because we're actually boosting our brain power. We're increasing brain connectivity. And these things are so important, as I mentioned earlier, about the ability of reading to decrease your cognitive decline. Keep this in mind. When you're creating new pathways in your brain, you are then fighting cognitive decline, which is the elimination of neural pathways. So think about this. You're doing the exact opposite of the process that leads to dementia. Now, as I finish here over the last 4 minutes, I hope I made a good case about why you should be reading. But now I want to talk to you about how that you can read more. Because we live in a world that's dominated by screens and the digital revolution, and you really have to kind of fight against it. In last month's program, we talked about screen time, how much screen time was safe for you, and what the dangers were when you have too much screen time, or what I call excessive screen time. Well, one of the easiest ways to fix that is to read more and screen less. Spend less time on your cell phone, computer, tablet, television, and more time reading books. Again, I mentioned earlier, there's this, as we've seen screen time go up, we've seen reading time go down in equal proportions. There's so many hours in the day that we have for recreation. And if you're spending 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours a day on your cell phone, and let me tell you, there's average screen time in this country is actually more than that. There's just less time to read books. So, tip number 1, put your screen down. Close your computer, turn over your cell phone, turn off your TV, put your tablet in the cabinet. Pick up a book. So, how do we get books? Well, if you're in my house, you just look around, there's books everywhere. If you're not in a house with books in it, then go to the library. The library is such a wonderful, wonderful tool for us to be able to read more. It's a great pillar of the community. I used to go to my library in Clinton, New York when I was growing up all the time. I love that building. It's still there. It's just a wonderful little, almost all libraries are wonderful. And even if they're not the traditional brick kind of building that you kind of see and, very charming and quaint, even if it's a wooden shack or a trailer, it's what's in there that counts. Libraries are free. You walk in, you get a library card. You take out books. You take out audiobooks. Libraries are wonderful tools for you, and we need to avail ourselves more of libraries. So get a library card. That's a great thing. Here's a good one. Get a Kindle. I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Kindles are wonderful. 3 of the reasons I love Kindles is number 1, it's very light. You can take it with you at any time. You can put 30 books in there. My one battery charge reads 8 books for me. And in my case, being 60, with not great short-term vision or near vision, you can increase the font. It's great. Instead of having reading glasses with me, I just increase the font on my Kindle and I can read very happily. The last thing is they're backlit, so if you want to read in bed, you don't have to turn the light on and bother your partner. As a last point, people who read more sleep better. So if you're one of these people who are out there who are having sleep dysfunction, that's about 33. Chronic sleep dysfunction is about 33% of American adults. If you're looking at elderly American adults, it's about 50%. Reading improves your sleep. As a last point about reading more, people will take their cell phone with them at all times, just in case they have some downtime. They can look over this, they can look over that. Bring your Kindle with you. Read a book while you're waiting for something. It's a great way to pass the time. It really is. Once again, I really appreciate your time and participation. And please check out any of my old programs on my YouTube channel, which is Your Health Matters with Dr. Peter Hogenkamp. They're also on the PEG TV site. And if you go on my website, you can find them there as well. Cheers.